TellyCast, the TV industry news review.
Hi, I'm Justin Crosby, and welcome to this week's TellyCast. This week, my guests are Heather Jones, Chief Creative Officer EMEA and General Manager UK at A&E Networks, and Jordan Schwarzenberger, co-founder of Arcade Media and manager of YouTube superstars The Sidemen. It's all coming up on this week's TellyCast. My first guest on this week's TellyCast is A&E Networks Chief Creative Officer EMEA and General Manager of the UK, Heather Jones. Welcome to TellyCast, Heather. How are you?
Thanks very much, Justin. I'm very well, thank you. Delighted to be here. Thank you very much for asking me.
It's lovely to have you on the show, and we bumped into each other at Edinburgh, didn't we, having a drink up there, and I'm really glad you accepted my invitation to come on and have a chat. Let's start with your role at A&E Networks then. There's obviously two roles you have there, Chief Creative Officer of EMEA and General Manager in the UK. Just give us an idea of your key responsibilities straddling both of those roles.
Well, like a lot of companies, they like to do a two for the price of one. Hence I've got two titles and two remits. The quick one, I guess, is the GM of the UK. So effectively, that means that I'm responsible for the P&L of the UK business. The one that I probably spend more of my time and energy on is the Chief Creative Officer across EMEA. So with that, it means that I oversee everything to do with programming, marketing, comms, creative, research across all of our EMEA footprint. So lots of discussions about commissions in the UK, about rebranding a channel in Poland, about acquiring content for Africa. So really, really varied and definitely quite demanding, but incredibly fun.
Well, I was talking to Lucas Green from Banijay last week, and he was talking about, you know, with these global roles, I mean, I know yours is EMEA, but your global roles, you sort of go to bed with, whichever way around it is, but Australia, and you wake up with LA or whatever it is, or London. Do you find that if you got that same sort of demands on your time, but I suppose your time zones are slightly more compacted, aren't they, with just an EMEA remit?
Absolutely. Not too bad. The only time I get dragged into other time zones, sort of more than sort of 2 or 3 hours, is when I have to kind of interact with our shareholder Hearst, who are based in New York. And that's 5 hours. So I'm an awful lot better off than those people who work for the big studio businesses that are LA based, because that I don't envy them that. Or as you say, having Australia in their remit. So no, my day is fairly manageable in comparison to other people that have kind of international roles.
We'll come and talk a little bit more about A&E Networks in a little while. But first of all, I'm always really interested in hearing about how people have worked their way up to the positions they currently hold in the TV industry. So can you tell us a little bit about your career journey today, how you got into telly, what your path was to where you are right now?
Sure, yeah. Well, I unfortunately didn't have a parent who worked in telly, didn't know anybody that worked in telly. So I did have to kind of claw my way in through quite a strange route, actually. I realised when I was kind of a teenager, I was all about kind of acting and performing and everything. But I also love literature. And so I decided that it would be a good idea to study drama at university and focus very much on kind of the literature side of it, but also the acting side. Realised partly there, and also I spent a year of my degree in California, actually, where I actually majored in TV when I was out there. Realised that I probably was never going to cut it as an actress. So I binned that ambition and really kind of threw myself into TV and decided that was it. That was the only thing I wanted to do. So left uni, applied for all the graduate trainee jobs that were there, didn't get any responses. It was the awful era of the early 90s. So very hard to get jobs anywhere, really. So I pretty much ran away to go and work at, not to the circus, but to go and work at Euro Disney just before it opened, where I was a waitress. So I started there as a waitress, worked my way up through various roles. And within about 18 months, I became the Euro Disney ambassador, which is a really random job, changes every year. You become the official face for the park throughout the world for a year. So I had this crazy year when I was 23, where I literally traveled the world with Mickey Mouse, just, doing speeches and presentations and, visiting children's hospitals and doing all sorts of things. You do it for a year, and at the end of it, you get to pick the job you want or the department you want to work in within the park. And I said, well, I don't really want to work in the park. The only thing I want to do is to work in telly. And so through a very convoluted route, they managed to negotiate me a 6-month unpaid period of work at Buena Vista Productions in London. So I was told there's no actual job, but they've agreed to take you on for 6 months. You're just going to shadow. That's all you're going to do. But you need to be there in 10 days. And I'm like, well, there's no job, but I have to be there in 10 days. That's really interesting. So I turned up, middle of 95. Day one, my producer said to me, okay, so you need to go and help buy the props today. You're on the shoot tomorrow. You're in the edit on Thursday. So you're running this week for the show. And I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. What, like actually working, not just watching. He's like, are you kidding? There is like all hands on deck. So much to do. Great that you're here. Just go on out there, start buying the props. And I said, oh, okay. So am I a runner then, not a shadower? And he went, you're running this week, but next week you're going to be writing the show. And I kind of went, right. So I've never actually worked in telly, and you want me to write a show. And by the way, this was network television. These were ITV and BBC shows, Disney Adventures, Disney Club, those kind of things. So the very simple single camera type thing. It was just links. So it wasn't complicated, but I had zero telly experience. And I said, but I have no idea what I'm doing. And he said, just take home some scripts overnight, read them so you get a sense of what it's about, think about what you're going to make next week's show about, and don't worry about it, because if it's really rubbish, I'll just rewrite it. So I think that was a really good lesson for me in having faith in somebody and letting them kind of take some risks. And so that was it. Literally week 2, I wrote the show. It really wasn't very good, but I improved quite quickly. And it was really a baptism of fire. And I compare that to sort of some of my peers who've gone in via the sort of the BBC trainee route, and where you really learn the craft. 6 months after starting in TV, I was directing and producing, and the crazy days of early cable TV because they moved me onto the Disney Channel as well. Made some shows for them, so really worked my way up very, very quickly.
So Heather, I've got to ask you at this point then, your role at the moment, obviously you're all about P&L. When did you hold your first pay negotiations then? If you were coming into this role, it's like, oh, there's no salary. I'm assuming that you got in there pretty quickly.
That's actually a really good question. I didn't ask the question for 6 months.
No!
Because I let the 6 months play out. I was told it was 6 months unpaid. And so I let that play out. And then I went in and said, I need to make sure that I'm being paid what the other people doing my job are being paid. So it is one of those hard lessons that you learn. And it took me quite a long time to kind of figure out how you ask for pay rises. And actually what I think it was once I started working it, it's very difficult when you're freelance, but once you're salaried, you still have those kind of questions. And when you get a new job and so forth, it's like, how do you do that? And I think for me, it was really understanding what is my value to this company? Like, what am I adding? Where am I really making a difference? And therefore, can I justify going in there and asking for more? It takes a long time to figure that out.
Well, it also takes, I imagine, as somebody new to the business, that we've heard this term imposter syndrome that's been bandied about. And it is a real thing, right? Because if you're coming into whatever role it is within the TV industry and, you've been there for a certain amount of time, you love what you do. And obviously you're passionate. And that's what everybody in this industry is, or most people that I know are passionate about it. So you want to learn and you want to get experience and you really enjoy doing what you're doing, and you're not really thinking about how many hours you're working a week. You just want to get the job done and do a great job. But when it comes to, I want to be paid for this, or can I get a pay rise? A lot of people, particularly young people, are shy to doing that. The question is, when is the right time, I suppose. But I guess when you certainly, you feel you're established. You went, okay, I'll do the 6 months, then I'll say, come on, take me on full time. And because at that point, obviously, you've made yourself indispensable. to that team,
Exactly.
presumably.
Exactly. By that point, I had a role, a remit. It was very clear what I was doing and where I was adding value, and that I was doing the same job as my peer who was being paid a certain salary. So, yeah, so I felt comfortable doing that. But I think one of the great developments that has happened over recent years is this doing away with unpaid roles, which hopefully doesn't exist anymore. Obviously, there's a bit of creep with the whole, they're just interning for a couple of weeks and then it becomes a month or a couple of months. I feel very strongly about that, because it doesn't allow people that come from working class backgrounds to work in our industry. And I think it's really, really important that is addressed. I was incredibly lucky. I could, stay on people's floors. I had saved a bit of money. I could do that. And then I got a decent salary once I did start working, because, of course, by the time I did start working, by that point was an AP. I was an assistant producer. So I wasn't on a runner's salary. I was on a better salary. But it can be really, really tough. And you've got these incredibly talented people who find it hard to survive because of those low pay rates. So long may it continue that we pay people properly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm always astonished how young people today can actually get by in London, and I'm sure this is the same in many cities around the world where there's an established TV industry that young people coming in at 23, 24. And surviving in some of the most expensive cities in the world. I never understand how they can actually do it, other than being supported by the mums and dads or whatever. But you're right; it's great that there are now, hopefully, none of these unpaid roles. And if there's anybody out there who's operating any sort of unpaid scheme, then come on, turn it around. You need to pay people what they're worth. Anyway, so what happened after that then, Heather? You became established at Buena Vista.
Yeah, so I worked there for a couple of years, and then I decided I wanted to get out of just kids. I was really interested in kind of broader entertainment genres. So I moved across to freelance for a company or channel at the time called Trouble TV, which was part of FlexTech Television. So that was aimed at kind of teenagers, and had an absolutely brilliant time there. Continued sort of directing, producing, started exec producing a couple of years later, was absolutely loving it. I'm like, that's it. My life is being a freelance producer, exec producer. This is it for me. And then the lady who was running the channel at the time called me in one day and said, you seem to have a really good feel for the channel and the brand and the audience and stuff. Would you be interested in running the channel, like becoming a staff and running the channel? And it was Lisa Opie at the time. And I went, why would I do that? I'm freelance. Like I'm a program maker. That's what I do. I don't want some sort of corporate job. That's really weird. And so I turned it down initially. And then I went out for a drink with a friend who had been herself freelancing for about 15 years. And I told her this story, and she kind of went, are you crazy? You've been offered a staff job for more money, and it's still an editorial job. The role was channel editor. She said, why don't you do it for 6 months? And if you don't like it, then you can just go back to being freelance. And so I thought, you know what? She's probably right. I'll give it a go. I'm really not sure about the whole sort of, program acquisitions and scheduling and all that sort of stuff, but I'll give it a go. And within a week of doing it, I realized that actually that was what I was meant to do. Never looked back. So I was channel editor at Trouble TV, moved across to Paramount Comedy as director of programming. And then a couple of years later, became the managing director. So that was my first time as sort of running a business. And that was a really steep learning curve. So not only being responsible for all of the output, but actually, looking at restructures and affiliate deals and all the other things that just feel terribly grown up in comparison to just looking at programming.
You're right. It's a slightly different way into the industry, but obviously it's something that you've thrived on, that the ability to run your own business, if you like. So you're at A&E Networks. Now, I have to admit that I'm often a little bit confused when it comes to A&E in the States and then A&E Networks internationally or outside the States. So can you just explain how the organisation works. You mentioned earlier on that Hearst is a shareholder.
Yes.
Tell us about your channels and how A&E Networks International works.
Right, okay. So our channels are a joint venture run out of the UK, and the joint venture is 50-50 between Hearst and Sky. So I work really closely with Sky for lots of reasons, not least because they're a shareholder in the business. And so that joint venture is for most of EMEA. There's a few territories that are just Hearst only. So we have the name of A&E Networks because we used to be half owned by A&E in the US, who in themselves are a joint venture between Disney and Hearst, which is why it kind of gets a bit complicated. But essentially, when the Disney Fox transaction happened, there needed to be a change because it would have meant that with Disney now owning Nat Geo, they would have had too strong a foothold in factual across Europe, according to the European Commission. So Hearst effectively bought out the share from A&E, so that's why about 3 years ago, we became a joint venture between Hearst and Sky. So we're called A&E Networks, and then you go to Edinburgh and A&E Networks International paid for the opening night drinks. And I had everybody coming up to me going, "Oh, God, thanks so much. It was such a lovely event." I had nothing to do with it, but I got to the point where I was just saying, "You're welcome. I'm so glad you could come." But actually, that was A&E Networks International, who are obviously a huge, successful global organization based in New York. They have the set of channels in the US and internationally outside of EMEA, and they also have program sales and so forth as well. So we share the same name, but we're actually no longer part of the same company.
Right. So essentially, A&E Networks is completely distinct from A&E Networks International.
Exactly.
So tell us about your channels then.
So across EMEA, we've got, how many different brands we've got? So we've got, in the UK, it's Sky History. Outside of the UK, it's History. We've got Crime and Investigation. We've got History 2. We used to have Lifetime, but we no longer have Lifetime as a linear channel. And we also have Cosmo in Spain, which is a sort of a random one that we've inherited as part of the Hearst transaction because that's a wholly owned Hearst business. But primarily, and we have Blaze, of course, in the UK, and currently also in Italy. But I think the main focus of what we do is pay TV, and it's two key brands, and they are Crime and Investigation and History. I think most people are familiar with, everybody knows what the History Channel is. Most people probably would imagine, would know what Crime Investigation is. It does what it says on the tin, but they're both kind of what we call passion brands. They're very clearly defined. They know what they are. They know who their audience is, but they're very much positioned in that kind of premium pay TV space.
I'm a bit of a History Channel fan myself,
Good.
so I know all about Sky History. And obviously, Crime and Investigation, you must be reaping the success of all of the true crime boom that's been building and building. And it seems to be, ever growing around the world. Is that what you're seeing? Are you seeing numbers increasing and viewers still increasing as the brand gets better known around the world?
We were the original true crime kind of channel brand, certainly in the UK and across EMEA. And then Investigation Discovery came along and we were like, competition. But as they grew, we also grew and went, well, that's quite interesting. So collectively, we seem to be growing the appetite for true crime content. Then Sky Crime came along, same thing happened. We all kind of went, oh, what's going to happen now? And in fact, they grew, we continued to grow. And then obviously, as you say, the whole explosion, and I think we have to credit Netflix with what they did with the likes of Making a Murder and so forth. And I think what they did by approaching true crime in the way that they did, with it kind of serialized and then things like Serial, actually, podcasts and so forth, suddenly true crime was no longer something that middle-aged women watched in secret in the evenings when their husbands had gone to bed and something they didn't really talk about. It would, true crime used to be a guilty pleasure. And now it's absolutely cool to like true crime and to talk to your friends about it. My daughter, she's now 20, she obsesses about true crime and is constantly watching one YouTuber or another talking about some sort of true crime case. So I think it's true crime has absolutely had a huge a huge rise, and we don't see any signs of that stopping. And it's moved out of just being something that you kind of do in high volume to actually also having these shorter run, quite expensive, really well-made documentaries as well. And certainly, as I said, we were the first ones doing true crime. We were always the ones that were commissioning a lot of local content. And what has happened is we've really been kept on our toes by this evolution. And so we've had to continue to try and look for different ways different ways to tell a story, different genres of true crime, different ways to use talent, increasing our cost per episode as well, because there is so much competition out there. But, that's great for the viewer because it's all getting better.
I think it's fascinating, the true crime space. So those two main brands that you have under A&E Networks then. So am I right in saying that Crime and Investigations skews slightly more female and Sky History skews slightly more male, or is that just an old-fashioned assumption?
That is not an old-fashioned assumption. You're absolutely correct. That is the case. They probably neither of them skews quite as much as you might expect. And certainly it depends on the genre. So when you put on crimes about things like mafia or heists or anything like that, we tend to, crime investigation will skew a bit more male. The shows about murder, particularly where there's a focus on the victim and empathizing with the victim and the victim's family, that tends to skew a bit more female. So CI definitely skews slightly more female. History used to skew more male, particularly because of the pipeline of content we were getting from the History Channel in the US, which for a long time was extremely male. And one of the areas of focus that I've had in the last kind of couple of years is to rebalance that. Women are absolutely just as interested in history as men. And therefore we need to make sure that the history brand feels like it's a place for women as well as for men. So we're doing a lot more of telling women's stories, looking at things from a female perspective, not with a view to saying this is a show for women, but certainly to make sure that women are happy to sit on the sofa and listen to that story alongside the men. And a show like 72 Films made Royal Bastards for us last year. And that obviously told a female story of Margaret Beaufort, and quite an unknown story about how her influence and how she really changed the course of the British monarchy. It was a very kind of female-led story. And we saw that actually that show skewed much more female than male. So we know we can bring women into history for the right kinds of stories. So yeah, definitely looking to kind of broaden out who are the viewers and also make both brands a bit younger as well.
Right. Okay. And that's essentially the strategy when it comes into your commissioning, is to make both of those channels younger and essentially appeal to its outside of its core audience, which is, as you would expect, is something that you would want to do. But is there any more detail you can give to any producers listening who may be wanting to pitch to you for CNI and for Sky History? Is there any sort of clues in terms of what you're specifically looking for right now?
Oh God, good question. I think when it comes to crime, take the lead of what's the new genre that we could and should be doing. We've got a show about stalking coming soon. I think that's going to do really, really well. What are the new types of crime and the new genres that would work for us? And I think the common thread for both CI and history is our use of talent. And I think we're quite ambitious with the talent that we use to headline our shows. So always be mindful of who is the kind of surprising but recognizable talent that we could attach to our formats. And I think history continues to be us. We're always looking for stories that are told in a way that really brings it to life. It's, our tagline is history is alive. We don't want to have just an academic talking to camera telling stories. We want things to feel like they're very contemporary. So a good example, I guess, would be something like Ross Kemp, Shipwrecked Treasure Hunter, that we had recently, where he obviously goes diving onto wrecks and then investigates the various different finds that they gather We had Curse of the Ancients with Alice Roberts. Alice is a brilliant talent for us. Again, that looked at ancient history, but very, very much in a contemporary way. And then what we've done with Al Murray, the two shows that we did with Al Murray. The first one was Why Does Everyone Hate the English? Looking at the reasons, the centuries old reasons why there are many Scots, Welsh, French, German, and there was another one as well. I can't remember what the fifth one was, that hate the English, and incredibly entertaining. He's very funny, using a local comedian each time. Oh, the Irish. How could I forget the Irish? So it was Al Murray, local comedian, lots of fun and banter, going out and about doing stuff, but through it, you really got some amazing nuggets about the history of conflict between our two nations that were absolutely fascinating that I didn't know. And that's a really good example of how we want to do history and continue to do history going forwards, that absolutely rooted in fact, but presented in a really entertaining way.
I saw Damien Lewis Spy Wars. That was another project from Sky History, wasn't it? It
was, yeah. So that's obviously that's more recent history. But how fantastic to get a talent like Damien Lewis fronting a show for us. And yes, some of those stories were just extraordinary that I'd never heard before. But yeah, great way to use talent to then tell these stories, often for the first time, to our viewers.
One of the questions that I wanted to ask you was about, you talked about pay TV and being, very much focused on pay TV, when we're seeing that, every day it's seemingly a new fast channel launches or new AVOD offering, and lots of network operators are spinning out various different products. But you're steadfastly a pay TV operator. What's the reasoning for that?
The honest truth is, it's partly because we're half owned by Sky, right? So that they are a pay TV platform. That's what they do, and I think, therefore, it makes sense for us to be a valued part of their portfolio. We don't want to start to stray too far into free to air. We have Blaze, which does a brilliant job for us, using the content that we've got the free to air rights to, or that we've negotiated. We also do have some fast channels. We launched 2 channels on Pluto earlier this year that are doing incredibly well, and we're looking to launch a third. So we do play in the free space. We also do quite a lot of short form and mid form, the YouTube, the Facebook, the Instagram, all those kind of things as well. But our focus is about being pay TV, and it's about making sure that we are part of a premium subscription type business. And which probably leads me, and I suspect you're going to ask me about our recent launch of Crime Investigation Play direct to consumer, which was a really big moment for our business. So how that kind of fits in is we have our pay TV channels on Sky, Virgin in the UK. We also launched Play services on Amazon and Apple a couple of years ago now, that have gone incredibly well. And in fact, particularly Crime and Investigation Play has just outperformed our expectations month after month, year after year, to the point at which we kind of went, wow, maybe we could do this on our own, which is what we've just done. So we've literally just gone out there, direct to consumer. The offering is exactly the same as pay TV. So we're approaching this quite differently to a lot of our competitors. So firstly, we're not betting the farm. We're not doing a Disney. We're not doing a Discovery. We are still pay TV at our heart. What we're doing, though, is making sure that our brands are in all of the different environments and on all the different platforms where the viewers might be. And that might be on Amazon. It might be direct to consumer. So you can pay $3.99 and subscribe to Crime Investigation Play. If you're not a Sky subscriber or a Virgin Media subscriber, you can still access just that service. So it's still pay TV. It's still about subscribing to our kind of premium crime service or our premium history service. It's just another way for our viewers to access our content. Obviously, right. What that meant was bringing in a whole new skill set that we didn't have before. And that's why D2C feels like such a change for us as a business. It's purely about the fact that we've only ever had data that is effectively business to business. We get Barb data, and we all know how that's collected. Suddenly, we're in a game where we have live dashboards where you can see exactly what every consumer is watching if they've ticked the right boxes when they've signed up, where you can have direct conversations with your customers. And it's a retail relationship, the whole CRM bit and the performance media in terms of the marketing. This is a skill set that we just, as pay TV channels or even free to air channels, we've never needed before. So it's been really, really exciting to kind of get our heads around what all of that means. But actually, the offering of what people are buying is exactly the same. It's the same content on Crime Investigation Play, whether you're watching it on Sky or whether you've paid to subscribe.
Right. Okay. So as you say, it's taking the channel to where people are consuming content rather than expecting them to come to the Sky platform,
exactly.
which makes perfect sense. So any operator then looking to compete, so in terms of your channels, you're vying for attention with a customer in the same way that Netflix is, and many huge technology businesses as well as content businesses are these days. So you obviously need to have an original strategy, and you talked about it a little while ago. How can you compete then in terms of the scale of these sort of shows, the scale of and the ambition of the projects that you're commissioning? Can they stack up against a Netflix or a major true crime or investigation series on a domestic broadcaster? I mean, does it stack up, your budgets, against theirs?
A very good question. Yes, it does, actually. I mean, sometimes it requires us partnering with them. So, for example, I Am a Killer was a co-production with Netflix. So we had First Window in the UK and a couple of other territories around Europe. So we had a 12-month window. We paid a minority of the budget, but we had full editorial control. Netflix picked up the rest of the budget for the other territories and for a second window in our key territories. So that's a great example of a show that had a really good budget, but we only paid minority of it. But we were in control of it, and we had first window on it. So sometimes it is about the partnering, as I'm sure many of your other guests in the past have talked about, this need to the windowing and the co-production and how shows are financed these days, expensive shows. I mean, it's amazing. It's incredibly complicated, but we play in that world as well. We also have worked with Motion Content Finance and Krempelwood, who have been incredible at funding a lot of our originals. And in fact, I think our slate next year, pretty much all of our originals for Sky History next year are going to be funded by Motion. So that makes a massive difference. But when you actually look at the cost per hour, I would say not only are we competitive, we are in many cases spending more than our peers. And I would say we're also probably slightly more generous when it comes to kind of the back end terms where we can be as well. And we've done that by year on year growth in budgets effectively. So our investment in original content has got more and more each year. So we've been spending less and less on kind of acquisitions and other types of content so that we can invest more and more on local commissions. So our tariffs go for, crime tends to be a bit cheaper. If it's a formatted crime show, it could be around the kind of 50, 60K, but we have spent up to kind of 3 times that for the right title. When we spend more per episode, we tend to do a lot fewer episodes. And then on history, probably similar starting point, kind of 50 to 75. But we have on many occasions gone to sort of 175, 200 or so per hour. That they are good tariffs. And don't even start me on what we're spending on the drama documentaries. I can't even, it makes my own eyes water, let alone anybody else's. But, shows like the 72 films, Royal Bastards and then Utopia Royal Mob, they are proper terrestrial size. I would say even more than quite a lot of kind of drama docs on terrestrials. But they're really important for us, and they're key moments. And they're the thing, we recently won Broadcast Channel of the Year at the Broadcast Digital Awards for the non-PSB channels for Sky History. Well, it's because we're investing in this original content in this way for those very important moments That's why kind of the industry recognises what the importance that we're placing on those sorts of shows.
So these are your tentpole shows essentially, and these are the key shows that bring consumers to your channel, whichever platform they're accessing it through. This is your key tentpole original strategy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's also why the talent is so important for us, because we don't have a terrestrial TV channel to cross promote from. We don't have massive marketing budgets. So we're incredibly reliant on getting fantastic PR, on getting, somebody on the Sunday brunch sofa, on Loose Women to talk about our shows, so the talent has to work really hard to make sure that we get all of that, advance notice that we can for people to sit up and go, my God, I really want to watch that. And then the other bit that we are hugely focused on is the quality of our images of our shows. And this is something that people probably don't talk about that much, but it's absolutely make or break for your success in pay TV. If you've got a really beautiful bit of artwork and a great poster that Sky love it so much, they want to make it the hero image on their UI for the day that you launch it or for the week that you launch it. That's what gets you great ratings. So you need the beautiful artwork. And as we all know now, in the non-linear world, when you are, scrolling through any on-demand platform, and for us, that's true for Amazon or on our D2C service, you do notice artwork that is really beautiful and that clearly tells you what the show is about as well. So our investment in and focus on making sure that our ways to sell the show are as strong and as compelling as possible are sometimes just as important as how good the show is. You can't let yourself down with that. You've got to make a great show look absolutely brilliant, literally within half a second.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. And this is something that I'll be speaking to Jordan a little bit later in the show about, in terms of the thumbnails that are absolutely key in digital content when it comes to YouTube or whatever other platform. It's the same concept, essentially. It's like, how do you stand out amongst all of this other content out there? And as you say, the thumbnail and the title.
Yeah. That's exactly it. I'm obsessive about titles, and I poor Dan Corn, who's our VP of programming, who is amazing. I give him so much grief. He brings me show, and I'm like, I love the show, but the title's not working for me. Like, we have to come up with something better. Yeah, and that is no surprise that we commission shows with provocative titles like Royal Bastards, like Why Does Everyone Hate the English? It's really important that you grab people straight away. And then when it comes to the imagery, we're now into this place where not only are you having to do episodes, we used to have one picture for a show, didn't we? That was what we had. Now you have to do episodic imagery. And now it's getting so nuanced that you need multiple images depending on who you're targeting. So depending on what the algorithm is saying and what else they've watched before, you may have to have multiple executions for an individual episode as well. So the whole kind of creative support for content in a non-linear world is just mushrooming.
No, really interesting. We could actually do a whole show on this, actually talking about discoverability and assets, because it is often overlooked, actually. Anyway, fascinating. And now it's time for Story of the Week, where my guests get to choose the TV industry story that caught their eye in the past 7 days. Heather, what's your story of the week?
My story of the week is something that actually wasn't in broadcast. It was something that one of my international colleagues picked up on, and she mentioned it. And so I had to kind of go away and look it up because I was like, really? And it's about a possible future merger of Warner Brothers Discovery and Comcast, which I hadn't heard about, but clearly it has been picked up in the press, particularly in the US. And I just think it's fascinating because obviously Discovery is a key competitor in terms of the Discovery Channel versus History and investigation Discovery versus crime investigation. So we watch them very closely, and they are really, really good at what they do. And Zaslav is clearly an incredibly clever man. But I think it's just fascinating to see he's so ambitious that he already acquired Eurosport back in 2015 for over $1 billion. Then there was the Scripps acquisition in 2018 for nearly $15 billion. And then obviously we were all pretty much sort of surprised by the merger with Warner Brothers. That was such a big move, and it really strikes me that for the last 3 or 4 years, every year, the story around kind of, those big American mergers and acquisitions is, this is it. This is the year of the mega merger. And whether it's Disney Fox, whether it's, there's just been so many of them, haven't there? Comcast Sky. And it's kind of like, so that's it. That's the end of the mega mergers. And it's like, wow, no, it really isn't. It's still carrying on. And even though this transaction apparently, if it were to happen, can't happen until at least April 24, because the Warner Brothers Discovery thing, it takes the structure, apparently, it all needs to be worked through and everything. It's complicated, but they are carrying a debt of 53 billion. And they've committed to making annual savings of $3 billion, which, that's a big number. That's a big amount of savings to make every single year. And speculation that actually, was it always Zaslav's endgame to do this, so it's not about him overreaching necessarily. It's about actually this is where he wanted it all to end up. But are we in a world where in 5 years' time there's only like 3 mega companies in media in America? It's extraordinary.
Fascinating story that. We'll put the link to the story. It's actually in the Hollywood Reporter that originally reported that. So we'll put a link to that story in the episode description. Now it's time to find out your hero of the week and who or what you're telling to get in the bin, Heather. Who's your hero of the week?
Well, my hero of the week is actually a guy that works on my team called Kenny Reynolds. So he is the VP of Creative at A&E. He is hands down the most talented creative I've ever worked with. And when I say creative for us, on the broadcasting side, it's promos, it's short form, it's all of our artwork and imagery, it's all that kind of stuff. And I would go so far as to say I think he's the most talented kind of creative in the industry. Certainly when I look at kind of work that's done by agencies and so forth as well. So hugely talented man. A year ago, he was diagnosed with very serious cancer. So was off being treated. He had like 9 months of chemo. He had a massive operation. He is still on chemo. But the reason he's my hero of the week is because this week he comes back to work. He's still receiving chemo. He's just desperate to get back. He says, I want to get back to doing what I love. And I, having obviously spent a lot of this year talking to him regularly and keeping in touch, I have never in my life met somebody with so much positivity, so much resilience, so much enthusiasm for everything that he does. And now look at him; he's not clear, but he is absolutely throwing himself back into work again. So hats off. I'd love to be as amazing a person as he is. So big hero of the week to Kenny Reynolds.
Well done to Kenny. And how about getting the bin then, Heather? Who or what are you telling to get in the bin this week?
I would say it's not even just this week. For me, this is one of my pet peeves. What I'm putting in the bin is private education. I went to a state school. It's not an amazing or famous state school at all. It was my local comprehensive, but I loved it. And I think we've got such an issue in our country at the moment with inequality. All the decisions that the current government are making are really not helping with that. But the problem of private education is it just perpetuates that gap between the rich and the poor and our incredibly outdated class system that exists. And I think, COVID demonstrated how big that gap was between state education and private education and just made it bigger. And now we're living with that now. And actually, yes, that's a political thing to say, but I think it's really relevant to our industry. In one of my first job interviews, I was asked what school I went to, at which point I laughed and I'm like, well, you'd never have heard of it. And I didn't realize that it was intended as a welcoming question, as a kind of, which club do you belong to? But I didn't belong to a club. I've realized that it's harder for those of us, or it has been to this point, it's been harder for those of us who aren't privately educated, who aren't part of that club. And I just think this country in this industry would be in so much better place if it didn't have private education and enabled everybody to have access to great education. Get rid of the private clubs for the privileged.
That's right. And it's all part of the diversity drive, isn't it? Diversity in many, many different ways, and including, geographically where you come from, how you're educated. Absolutely. I think we seem to be very much going down that path. Hopefully, we're making some progress there, but we'll see. We'll try and get through the pound cratering against the dollar this week. And, who knows if we're going to have the same government in a few weeks' time. Who knows? Well, there we go. Public schooling, or private schooling, is going in the bin. Heather, thank you so much for joining me this week. Really enjoyed having a chat. Lots we got through there. Really enjoyed that. And will we be seeing you down on the Croisette in a few weeks' time at MIPCOM?
Well, if you've got a chilled rosé ready for me, I might find it in myself to come down. Yeah, absolutely. Wouldn't be missing MIPCOM. It's going to be a big one this year.
It really is. Yeah, looking forward to it. Well, I'll see you down there, as will lots of our listeners, I'm sure. So thanks again, Heather. We'll speak to you soon.
Thank you so much. Bye.
My next guest on this week's TellyCast is Jordan Schwarzenberger, co-founder of Arcade Media and manager of YouTube superstars, the Sidemen. Jordan, welcome to TellyCast. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, mate. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for coming on the show. You've had a pretty big weekend, haven't you?
We have. I was going to say, yeah, good. Just a bit tired. I think everyone in our camp is feeling a sense of relief and a lot of gratitude, but also, a lot of dead legs around the camp.
Yeah.
Been busy, but it's been amazing. So really happy.
For everybody listening, so this was the Sidemen's charity football match, which looked incredible, and the viewing numbers are off the scale, really. So we'll come to talk about that in a little bit more detail in a moment. To kick us off, tell us a little bit about Arcade Media and you.
Yeah, so I'm Jordan, and I started with two brilliant co-founders of mine, Aaron and Sam, Arcade Media back in, when was it? April 2021. We first met in December 2020. Me and Aaron go back quite a long time because we both worked at YMU, which is a big talent management company. I'm sure most of your listeners will know YMU or James Grant, sort of renowned as like the TV agency in the UK, looking after Anton Deck and Philip Schofield and Holly Willoughby previously, and so on and so forth. So I was over there as the chief creative officer. Aaron was in business management, looking after a number of people in the accountancy side. We got on really well, and we always just clicked. Knew we wanted to work with each other one day, but didn't quite have the right thing. He had gone off to manage some TikTok talent and had started on his own. I sort of supported him from afar and just helped him, whenever we'd chat and catch up and so on. And then he ended up meeting Sam Ewan. So Sam is, I would say it's pretty much I'd say it's 100% objective, the biggest accountant in the whole creator space in the UK. He is, leagues above anything else in that he has pioneered the space through his business Starbucks, which is the accountancy firm for creators. If you go and speak to most creators in the country and you say, Sam the accountant, they'll know who you're talking about, and that's Sam. So we then came together because Aaron and Sam spoke and realized there was this huge opportunity to do something a bit different in the space. We then linked up. Aaron was like to Sam, you need to meet Jordan. We all came together, and then we founded Arcade. And we founded it in the beginning of 2021, off the back of really the opportunity to go and speak to the Sidemen. So the idea being that Sam has been their their accountant, for the last 10 years, some as individuals and as the group. So he's really been there through the whole journey. He looks after Sidemen clothing and most of the individuals. And I think we all came together because we realized that the boys have done an unbelievable job. Culturally, they are leagues above anything else. For those who don't know the Sidemen, they are, the biggest creator collective in Europe, the biggest creators in Europe, really. They have hundreds of millions of followers between them. Well, I think about 100 million followers if you add up everything across all the channels individually and the collective channels. The collective channels are upwards of 35 million subscribers and followers and so on. So it's just huge numbers, billions of views, billion impressions every month, 250 to 300 million views across the channels every single month, like huge numbers. And it's one of those where if you don't know who they are, ask kids, they'll probably know. Almost definitely they will. So anyway, we came together because we knew that the guys had, I think, only scratched the surface of what was possible for their brand and their franchise. I think often when you're creating and you're building and you're growing, you don't often see just how big you are. And I think for the boys, there was probably a little bit of that where they knew they were obviously massive, but how do they evolve that, step it up, and build out this next chapter, which is all about, in my mind, building access to more fans across the world and entering IP, creating brands, franchises, and turning the Sidemen brand into a franchise. What is Disney for Gen Z? Born from YouTube, which is a quote that was recently in Tube Filter, which I think sums it up. And that was the idea, to approach them with this new model. Paired with that, having been at YMU, where I was sort of chief creative officer across all divisions, looking after hundreds of clients, thousands of clients. The idea also was to go to one and to really dig into just the one rather than spread ourselves. So we had a very small amount of clients, and that quickly actually just fell away to just being the boys, because what they needed was so demanding in terms of, and so big in terms of the opportunity. So it required 3 of us full time on it. And Sam still was and still is to a degree doing some of the accountancy stuff as well. It required a lot. And so we came together and the boys were like, yeah, let's do it. Let's go for it. We presented them with a bunch of ideas of things that we thought they could do brilliantly at. And a strategy for their future and their long-term building, if you will, of the brand. And they loved it and they agreed with it and they said, yeah, let's go for it. So we sort of started formally April 2021 at FYMU, and then we jumped straight in. And Arcade Media was born, and ever since it's become this, so it's been the most amazing year and a half together, where we've now launched a number of brands. We're looking down that list of ideas that the boys voted on initially. We've done probably about 5 or 6 of them out of a list of maybe 11 or 12. The ones being Side Plus, which is a membership club, which we launched in September last year, which has done amazingly well. Huge business now, got a whole team around it, incredible community across the world, which we couldn't be happier with. We launched Sides, which is the fried chicken restaurant, which we launched as a JV with Hero Brands, who run German Doner Kebab, Chopaloon, Island Poke. German Doner Kebab, again, for those who don't know, is the fastest growing food brand in the UK. Maybe eclipsed by Sides now. Maybe we've done it. I actually need to check with them. But before Sides, it definitely was huge numbers, an unbelievable business and great people. So we came together with them to launch Sides as a fried chicken chain. We've now got over 100 sites across the world, ghost kitchens.
100 sites. So this is the fried chicken franchise, which is Sidemen branded, that you created with, did you say Hero
Brands? Exactly.
Yeah. So that you've got 100 outlets around the world already.
Exactly. And they're ghost kitchen predominantly, apart from one, and that's becoming 2. So ghost kitchen, for those who don't know, sort of delivery dark kitchens, if you will, so all sold on the aggregator apps, kitchens which don't have physical dine-in facilities. And we've got over 100 in the UK, UAE, and Saudi Arabia, I believe, Oman. We're building out in the US very soon. India, we've got plans to launch a couple of 100, and just across the world. So we're looking at just building that brand out, and it's going really well. I think on social, the stat I really love is it's the most engaged food brand, I believe, in Europe. Might be one of the most engaged in the world. And definitely in the chicken space, we're number 1 in terms of engagement, second only to Nando's in terms of following. So we're catching up. I think we're on 313k, which is pretty good. So we're building, and it's going brilliantly, and people love the product. And we've got one physical outlet in Box Park, Wembley. We've got another one coming in Croydon, in Box Park there. So that's really exciting. We're buzzing about that, and we've got plans to launch a lot more and to get more into physical and to grow the brand out across the world. So it's been a lot of fun, that. And then we've also got XX Vodka, which is a vodka brand, which was a long time passion project, if you will, for the boys, which is again done brilliantly. We've done 3 sold out drops. We've done incredible numbers in terms of revenue, in terms of units sold, and we're on track to be, I think it was the fastest growing spirits brand, it might be ever, in terms of sales. There was a quote that somebody told me who knows what they're talking about. It was like, this has actually been the fastest growing spirit launch ever in the UK, or something silly like that. So anyway, we've got it's done brilliantly as well. Really happy with that. And then we've recently launched Side Cards, which is our trading cards. I wouldn't say it's a brand per se, but it's more our trading cards platform, if you will, for a partnership we've got with Topps. So Topps being obviously the lead-in collectibles and trading cards brand in the world.
That's like the football cards and
they do match attacks.
Kids basically, match
another
attacks.
One of them. If you don't know what it is, your kids definitely do. You've probably been buying them for your kids, almost definitely in shops for the last 10 years or so. So they do those, but we've launched a whole collection with them, which is in print at the minute, and excitingly, people are going to start getting them. It was made to order, but again, it sort of eclipsed their records. Their site crashed when we launched, and people went a bit nuts for it, which was brilliant, considering trading cards is quite a niche thing. But people really loved it, and the numbers were brilliant on that too. And then we've got loads of plans coming up, most of which I can't say, but recently we had our charity match, which was the kind, I guess, the crowning moment of the year for us this year. The boys haven't had one since 2019 pre-COVID, and it was just such an amazing moment. We'll talk about it in a minute. That's kind of us. So that's Arcade. We've got a team, I'd say, of around 15, 20 working for the boys full time now. That's growing. The Sidemen team is probably 100, 150 people across the whole network, if you think about all the touch points of food and chefs and people on the various JVs and so on. And it's growing at an amazing pace. We're all really happy. We're loving life. And it feels like we're at the start of something hopefully quite special with them. And all credit really goes to them, because their ability to make decisions, to give us freedom, space, and trust is unmatched to anything I've ever experienced before. And I think it's a large part of what of the success that we've managed to have with them so far.
It sounds amazing, John. I'm going to come back to the brand partnerships and franchise of the Sidemen in a second. But for our audience who are mainly TV industry and content industry experts and executives, can you take us back to the beginning of the Sidemen, to how this phenomenon started? Because again, anybody who hasn't experienced the Sidemen, just Google Sidemen and you'll see all the videos up there on YouTube. So it's a group of 7. Is it seven guys? Okay. So how did that start? Because were they individual creators who came together originally, or tell us the story of the Sidemen?
So they're coming up to 10 years next year, which is pretty phenomenal. They've been doing it for a decade now. They started off playing, it was a few of them in a GTA server that they would play with each other, and it'd be every day. They just a bunch of individual creators who come together to play Grand Theft Auto with each other, and they created a tag in the group called the Ultimate Sidemen. And there was a few, and then a couple more joined, and then a couple of the guys had a friend who was like, oh, why don't you join as well? And then they ended up growing this group out to a group of 7, and there were a few others who played in that server as well. But that group is the Ultimate Sidemen, if you will, sort of play consistently with each other.
So it's a social group created around video game Grand Theft Auto, where they can all play online together.
Exactly.
Everybody got together, hung out, and it's the social aspect of online gaming that really sort of gave them a platform, if you like, or an opportunity to speak together and hang out together online. That's
it. And they became, and some of them were friends. Josh and Toby went to school with each other. JJ and Simon went to school with each other. And then Ethan and Harry were sort of, I think, on the periphery of the group in terms of friendship. And then they ended up, being brought into the group. And, it was one of those where it's friends of friends, and they kind of came together and became this group of 7. And now, and even then they became quickly really good friends. And the group just grew in popularity, over time, the consistency of them playing and creating these events where they come live every night and they play with each other. And that just grew and grew and grew. Obviously, individually, they also had their own brands and worlds. But it became a real sort of, I guess, like a kind of cult-like phenomenon early on around watching them play with each other. That then evolved into them launching the Sidemen House. And the Sidemen House became a house where they would all come together as a group of 7. They were very ahead of their time in this. There was obviously...
So it's a physical house. So they moved into a physical house together. So you've got seven individual YouTubers, content creators, essentially, who've got their own channels, mainly around video gaming, right?
Yeah.
But they might have been doing other things individually. So they all came together, moved into this one house, and started creating content as a collective together.
Yes, and also as individuals. So it was a house where they'd all live. Obviously, they were much younger, and they just had the best time. It was this mansion out in Kent, in Orpington. And it's this iconic Sidemen house. And so and because of, again, the consistency and the work rate and the heavy, I remember speaking to Simon, I think he was saying he was filming and editing 4 or 5 videos a day. It's unbelievable work rate. And that is, I think, the testament of why they're so successful. It is the churn and the grind and the consistency of it all, which led to this build up of success over time, which now is this huge, massive thing. They could experiment with more different types of content. They were doing more videos together, building out more fun formats, just having fun with each other as a group of friends, which I think became infectious to a lot of people. And many had been there from the beginning. Many tuned in at that point, and people just grew up with them as this group of 7 friends, like 7 real friends in this house. And people felt like they were, and still do feel like they are, genuinely friends to millions around the world. That's how I think, that's the connection. And I think one thing that Ethan said recently, I think it might have been on Impulsive, was that there is a member of the Sidemen in every friendship group. So there's somebody who everyone can kind of relate to, you know, in terms of personality, like humor, whatever it might be. So again, there's this real spread of appeal that I think helped to catapult them. And that was really their takeoff period. That then led into the diss track period, which was absolutely huge for numbers when JJ said he was going to leave. And then there was this whole series of diss tracks back in, when was that, 2018, I want to say? Might have got that wrong. But anyway, they carried on, built and grew this whole brand out. And then they received a commission from YouTube Red, I think at the time, to launch the Sidemen show, which was then the first time, I believe, and I might have this wrong, but I'm pretty sure I've got this right, when they launched the channel. So the channel was actually launched because they needed a home collectively for this show to live on, because the way that YouTube original commissions work, this was when it was, I believe it was YouTube Red or YouTube Premium, I can't quite remember, was that they had to live on a native channel for a talent. So they launched that at the time. And then it just has grown from there. The channel, once that was set up, they started creating more formats and more content together, and it just grew and grew and grew and grew and grew until, from our perspective, we've come in right at this last point where they've done all this incredible work. We take very little credit. They've done all this work for 7 years, I think, when we met them, 7, 8 years. And now it's the time to build and scale into this global brand and powerhouse, which is more, I think, just recognition of the work they've been putting in for the last decade. Yeah. It's almost like this is where they should be, and now we're just doing that work to help them get there. But yeah, that's the story. I think it's an unbelievable story. It needs a film about it, to be honest, in terms of like it's unreal. And if you think about all of the best thing for me is how they've managed to stay as this group of friends. What kind of dynamic is required, how much humility is required for people in different parts of their careers, in different worlds, in different lanes, to come together in this way that is, I find, you know, they're all completely equal. They have a Supreme Court system of full majority. You know, if any decision goes to that Supreme Court, as I like to call it. And, you know, they have a real way of working with each other and a friendship that's so real, whereby they're able to have that longevity, and they've proven that already. So yeah, it's very exciting.
My son's, you know, a fan. Everybody's, I guess, a teenager or who's grown up with Sidemen, as you say, over 10 years. They're so relatable, the characters. They're so relatable and genuine. It's just like, I can imagine being a kid their sort of age who just wants to be in their gang, if you like. And the group of individuals, to me, this is going back years, but I'm looking at them in the same way that a collective of individuals, almost like Monty Python, the individual characters within Python, you know, with Palin and Cleese, they're not comedians, but they all had very different, strong characters. And I see lots of parallels with them, actually. Amazing success. As you say, they were creating so many videos over that time when they were working and living together that really honed their craft when it came to content creation and experimenting with short form or longer form. And that's the other thing to say. It's actually, this is long form content they're creating, isn't it? Yeah. Some of their shows are like an hour and a half, 2 hours long. Pretty
much minimum is an hour, upwards to 2 hours. And then they also do a BTS show for Side Plus, which is another hour to 2 hours. So really it's about 4 hours per video plus all of the social content and all of the cut downs, everything else. So yeah, it's a lot.
They must live most of their waking life in front of the camera, right? I mean, this is extraordinary.
Yeah, a sort of a very well ordered mess. Like you look at it, you're like, I can't understand, and then you break it down, like, okay, and it's relentless. I mean, they are the hardest working people I've ever met or worked with, without a doubt.
Well, they clearly deserve their success. So when it comes to digital content and formats, you mentioned formats a little bit earlier on. That's something to consider, really, in terms of one of the reasons for their success. This isn't just, you know, mates hanging out and chatting. And this is actually very well honed and planned content creation across a number of different formats. Can you just expand on that a little bit in terms of the process that the guys go through to create these distinct digital formats?
Yeah, of course. So I think looking at it in a sort of linear perspective, if you will, it's the same as having any sort of slate of content where you have, you know, your big ideas that have longevity, and the best ideas for the guys, especially now when their time is more strapped than ever. I think it's forced them to be a bit more formatted in the way that they think, because actually the more returnable concepts they can create, ultimately the easier it is to, and the more efficient it is to plan, to scale, to bring in new talent and so on. So I think there are a few really good examples of this. I think the biggest videos as a strand, if you will, the Tinder videos, which have just gone, obviously they've gone absolutely viral, and they have the 4 of those now. There's the hide and seek videos as well, which are a kind of classic format that comes back and back. The holiday videos, so $100 versus $100,000 holiday, are huge, and some of the biggest videos on the channel. They've done that in Europe, they've done that across various different countries and places in the world. And then there's also 20 versus 1, which is again a sort of dating show format. The best thing about that is the boys can take a sort of backseat almost. It's similar in a way to Ant and Dec's Get EMEA, where they're instructing and giving, sort of guidance to the guest. But the brilliant thing about that is somebody can come in and actually be the host of that, or be in the hot seat who isn't them. So again, it has a real factor to pull in other talent, and they've done one with Calix, with Logan Paul, with Gideon, with a number of other people, as well as a lot of the boys as individuals having done it as well. So yeah, there's a number of those formats now, and that I think is I guess in part a symptom of them becoming more stretched and more time poor, because they have to be creative in a different way. Where before you could think of massive, huge, big, sprawling ideas that might take a week to produce, now you can't really do that, because purely logistically, how do they do that and sustain it week on week? So I think the formatted approach is better, because it enables more consistency. You have templated ways of shooting and creating content, and the team know how to do it. You can up the levels every single time and add to it, but also it's just a lot more efficient for everybody. And the best thing is you can bring in other talent as well. So it's very easy to add to the reach and add to the experience through bringing in people you wouldn't expect into those shows. And I think it probably hints to a future for the guys as well, which is as almost producers of formats and as developers of formats, in that they have such creativity and they're able to develop and create shows, and they know what will be entertaining and what will work. Imagine applying that then to a linear mindset of, okay, well, how do we create a slate without them even involved? And I think that's something that we're definitely thinking about is what is that move whereby those formats can live on and actually have a life of their own in linear and in the mainstream sort of TV world, if you will, or the world of streamers, as well as building a funnel for new ideas to come through. So that's something we're definitely looking at and thinking about for them, and it makes, I think, a logical step, given that they are actually producers as much as they are the stars of the show themselves.
I can imagine there'd be no shortage of some of these super indies who wanted to do with the Sidemen to create those formats of tomorrow for a younger audience. So that'll be exciting to hear where that goes. Thinking about them as creators then, so they have their own development processes. How about the physical production? Do you have a retained production crew? How does the actual physical filming and editing work? What goes on behind the scenes in terms of production? Yeah,
there's a monster team behind it, as you can imagine, right? An absolutely huge team. I'd say sort of spearheaded in terms of Sidemen. Well, I guess you split it up in terms of the different channels across the network. If you call it, think of it as a network, it probably makes more sense. So the Sidemen Sunday show channel, if you will, which is the main channel, that is led from a production perspective in terms of the logistics, operations, making sure everything happens, casting 1,000,001 jobs by the incredible Tanya, who people might have heard of as TP if they know the Sidemen and they hear them talk about it, so they call her TP, who previously worked at Endemol. And she is unbelievable, one of the nicest people ever, and is, I think, the glue behind their operation, really, from a content perspective. If it wasn't for her, you would have no Sidemen Sundays. You wouldn't have the consistency, you wouldn't have the productions, because she came in actually off the back of, I believe, the Sidemen show when they first met. And she came in to run that whole operation. So she's absolutely essential. And she works with an incredible set designer called Lucy. So there's Tanya and Lucy, and they are, they build, create all the sets, which all of them are custom made and are created by them, with external crews. They're booking all the talent, making sure everything's all set. They're producing the show. And if you think about the level of the show and the scale of the production now, falling on really two people, and Tanya sort of leading that is astonishing. That level of consistency and the ability to keep building and growing and evolving it is super impressive. And if you know about their world, you may have heard of them, but they're quite behind the scenes, but they're absolutely essential to the whole operation. And without them, it's very difficult to see how it could sustain and build and be created and extended long term. So yeah, Lucy and Tanya are absolutely at the heart of that. Con and his team as well. So Constantine, who's a big creator in his own right, has been their videographer for a long time now, and he has a team of his own production company and a number of people working with him who are regulars on every shoot, from sound to to runners to videographers and so on. So he'll produce and film every video He actually used to go to school with Josh, so they go back quite a long way, and he's filmed music videos, and he's got a brilliant career in his own right. And he's again amazing. You've then got Kirsty, who is an exceptional photographer who on every shoot, she's capturing everything. It's how the boys are able to produce or get out so much content on social so quickly, is that they have this very well-oiled machine of videography and photography coming together with Con's team and then Kirsty's team. And then you've got a whole army of editors. So Chip Fat, that's his alias on Twitter, is probably the most impressive editor I've ever seen. He's definitely the most impressive editor the boys have seen. And he is just leagues above. And he now is the lead editor, I believe, across most, if not all of the big content that the boys do. So there's Chip, and then there's also the brilliant Dylan and a number of other editors across the board, also editors for social, like Restrained and Milk, and they've all got aliases, right? But so that Milk is not his real name. Restrained and Milk and a number of others who cut down all the content and make sure everything's leveled. And then obviously, well, not obviously, but for those who know our operation and system, you have Victor, who is is the head of content for the Sidemen. So his role is to build, manage, and strategically operate. So his role is around the ideation, supporting the boys on that, making sure delivery is done, bringing the whole team together. He's sort of the spearhead now from a creative and content perspective across the whole thing. So you've got all these teams who are operators and who are getting stuff done, and Victor's role is to manage that now, and also to innovate, to optimize, to manage social and marketing, and the actual rollout of every one of these videos. And since he stepped into his role, the results are unbelievable too. Like crazy growth across every single channel. You can see the sentiment. You can see the building of, again, just adding more to this incredible foundation. Even things like launching with these brilliant posters every single week. From a rollout perspective, we create these film posters led by Oscar, who's in Victor's team. Every single week now for the Sidemen Sundays and those have blown up and taken off. The way that Sidemen Shorts, Sidemen Reacts, and more Sidemen have grown and grown and grown since now having this structure in place as well has been a testament to that structure. And I think if there's one thing that I would like to say that we've done and we've supported the boys on, is building that structure. Because they've got all of the gold and all of the brilliance, but we hopefully have just built a little bit of structure and added onto that to give it the ability, and also them the freedom and the time back for them to do more of what they do best, which is the content and the creative, and for all of the rest of this machine to grow and build and to work while they're sleeping, basically. So they don't even need to think about it. And that's the aim. The more we can do so they don't have to and they can focus on what they do best, the more of that, then the better. And I think that's when we know we're doing our job.
Brings me back to something I was chatting with Heather earlier on in the show, when she was talking about the importance of assets, really great assets, when it comes to pay TV, actually, making sure Sky put, their shows in a really discoverable position. And that has a massive effect on viewers, on pay TV. Heather's one of the first TV execs that's talked about the importance of that. Whereas, I think a lot of TV execs really focused on making the best show possible. Of course, that's really important. But when you can't discover it, when we know there's so much content out there across, so many different platforms and channels, etc., that discoverability is key. So clearly the Sidemen, as digital first creators, those thumbnails and the algorithm of YouTube has got to be absolutely key. So they must have really learned their craft years ago, right? And developed that over 10 years to now become this incredible digital publishing machine. When the Sidemen publish a video, then is that the test and learn process finished then? Or, they put a thumbnail up and then, there's description and all of the search, because obviously YouTube is the second biggest search engine in the world as well. So that searchability is super key when you describe your videos. When they put a video up, they know what to put up, or is that the end of the process, or do they test and they change it around, if it's not performing as well?
Yeah, so I think that's where Victor recently, especially, he's been focusing a lot on that and actually adding to the optimization. So working with consultants and people who are really key and who know the space inside and out and can add to them, that mix of of when things are put out, it's not just putting them out, it's actually adapting them, evolving them. I think Mr. Beast is who has 5 thumbnails for every video that he puts out. And then if one doesn't bang immediately, it's on to the next, on to the next, on to the next. So there's this real sense of optimizing. I think we're trying to bring a bit of that into our system as well. And that's something that Victor's definitely doing and is looking at, is how do you constantly optimize, because you can game the system. It's also, I think, innate for a lot of the boys in terms of they know absolutely if something is going to work or not from the minute they look at it, from that pure instinct, because they've just done it so many times. Is the thumbnail and the title and the idea, and this is the thing, it's more about the title and the thumbnail than it is the substance and content anyway. The content is what you, once you get past that door, then obviously the content needs to be incredible to sustain you, to build retention time, to have, you know, returnability and so on. But actually to get you through the door, it's all thumbnail, all title. And that's, I think, as to your point, the way that streaming platforms, the way that pay TV has evolved, is that they are looking more and more like YouTube and they're looking more and more like a discovery content platform, which I think YouTube was really the first of. So it requires that same thinking. And to any execs who are listening in that space and in that world, I think you're absolutely right. It's learning from creators as to how they market, because if you can tap into a little bit of that when you are fighting off other shows, when you're, you know, you've maybe got that feature spot on Sky, for example, you've got one of those thumbnails. How are you making them look incredible and grabbing people from the moment from the first instinct and the first moment they have that impression? Because that's what YouTubers have to do every single day. So it's taking a bit of that learning. And actually, I don't know, you're right, I don't know how many people in the industry and TV think like creators in terms of marketing and in terms of the aesthetic, because the aesthetic is so key. And if you get that wrong, you will not get a fraction of the views that you thought you could. And I think actually you're right. It's becoming more and more like one process. So to Heather's point, I think she's absolutely bang on. And the more that TV execs can take from YouTubers and creators, the better in terms of rollout, because that's their whole game, really.
You know, it's really incredible phenomenon that the whole Sidemen, it's almost like an industry, isn't it? It's like a content machine. Now, we're talking about TV, and there's a bit of arrogance in TV when it comes to, you know, sometimes commissioners and sometimes execs saying, oh, you know, we need a younger audience. Let's bring in some YouTube talent and, you know, we can make a great show and cast them in this show and it will bring a younger audience to us. And you know what? We can market to their audience as well, their own 2 million audience. Right, commission, let's go for it. But that doesn't really work, does it? From a creator's perspective then, why doesn't that work? And how should the TV industry be working more with digital creators, and how should they approach it?
Yeah, well, I think firstly from and I can't speak for all creators, obviously, and I can't speak for anyone really, but from the way that I've observed, having been on the talent side, you know, working more closely with TV and seeing those conversations firsthand, where you're right, it's, oh, well, we want to get a young audience. These guys have an audience of 1 million followers. Well, if 10% of those followers can come over and watch our show, then we're all going to be rich and having a nice time. And in reality, that doesn't happen, because what typically happens, and this isn't for, I would say, the Sidemen, I'd say, are an exception to the rule, but for most creators who also have a leaning into the presenting or entertainment world, what generally happens is TV, I think the confines of TV means that you end up losing a lot of the gold, which makes the creators popular. And also audiences aren't stupid at all. And they know, they can see through, I think, that attempt to try and attract them through bringing somebody on, but not giving them the space and freedom or the real creative input. Yeah, I think they can see through that, and they can see that there's a somewhat cynical reason that they're here. And so I think there is a level of disconnection, because the reason why you know, content creators especially are so loved is because of that intimate relationship and that sense of, I know this person and I know them, you know, as they truly are, or as their character makes them to be, and I have a real connection to that. So when you put them into TV, and it's a very different frame, it's a different camera style and approach, it's a different setup, it's a different format, it's a different world. There's a jarring sort of tension, I think, a little bit, where it feels like they're out of place. And I'd say this more for traditional YouTubers, more than the creative presenters, really. So when you have creative presenters who are the next wave of presenters, really, right? They're just presenters who are from social, or who started on social, or who are big on social, and they're learning their craft. So people like Munya Chihuahua, for example, who is incredible and is built out. I would consider him to be a creative presenter type, where he wants to get into, and he is already huge in presenting, in comedy, in satire and everything else. His sketches and his ability to do it all is, I think, again, very rare, but he hosts shows and he can be a presenter of shows, and he's got a skill set as a presenter. And that's his ambition as well. So his ambition is to be in that world and in that space and to do social. But of course, the way that his career, you can see the trajectory in the blueprint, if you will. There's a blueprint for people with his skill set in that world. But then you compare that to the Sidemen or other people from YouTube who are entertainers, but they are like personality-led entertainers who are, big because they are themselves and they're creative, but they are not. There's no ambition generally to be presenters. They don't want to be in TV. There isn't any of that.
They're just being themselves, right?
They're being themselves. When you're bringing them into TV and you're not giving them the space to be themselves, there's a disconnect, and it feels like you're taking them and you're putting them somewhere where they're not comfortable, but also where they shouldn't really be. It doesn't feel right. And there's been not to name names and go through it, but there's so many examples of that I think most of us can even think about, where we put X talent on X show and it didn't feel right and it didn't work, but we thought it would work and bang and do amazingly well. The other thing I'd also say is social creators are not presenters, and they also don't know the skill set necessarily to be on TV. TV requires a very sharp skill set in a certain area, especially to be a presenter, to be a host, to be a comedy personality. Just because they're big on social and they're comfortable on social doesn't mean that they can actually do it for TV, because it's a completely different world and space, different pressures, and they're people and humans at the end of the day. And it requires time and ultimately skill sets, which you need to build and develop over time. So taking somebody who does something brilliantly on TikTok and trying to put them on TV, 9 times out of 10 it will fail, because ultimately, like, they're comfortable in their bedroom doing what they're doing, but you try and put them in a studio and with all the lights and everything else, and it doesn't feel right for them often from my experience. And so there is, again, that tension. I would almost not look at social creators as the key to getting young audiences, firstly, because I don't think that's right. Young audiences go where they want to go in terms of platform, in terms of consumption habit, and creators won't be the bridge for that. Your entire model might be the problem, but brutally, rather than the talent that you get in the show. Ultimately, are young people watching linear TV? No. And every graph that you've ever seen over the last 5 years shows this decline in terms of TV consumption and age. The younger you are, the less you watch TV. You're on YouTube, you're on social. So ultimately, the model has to switch to being where young people are, rather than trying to bring them over to you, because if they haven't come now, they're not going to come. It is my instinct. And I'm 25 years old now, and I definitely don't know, but I know that graphs and the data is so crystal clear that young people don't want to watch it. So I would say, rather than trying to appeal to young people, unless the format and the whole platform and the distribution of the content that's being created is actually in the spaces that young people are watching and consuming, then focus on the audiences you have and actually digging into those, rather than saying, well, we need to bring 15-year-olds onto TV, because ultimately they're not watching. And then I'd also say, when you look at the streamers as the exceptions, that's because the consumption habit and the way that people consume it is completely different. It's on demand. It's in my fingertips on my phone. It's up to me. And I think that's the difference. It's like Netflix, Prime, all these platforms have done very well with young people, not so much because of the talent that's in the show, but because the whole format and the back end is geared towards the way the young people are consuming in this time of social and and content, which is up to me to decide if I want to watch it or not. It's completely in my hands.
Yeah.
Whereas linear isn't like that. So I think it's just about that deeper conversation around, well, why young people are not watching TV, why the audience is not moving over. The kind of the plaster, if you will, of, well, let me try and get a big TikToker onto TV will not fix that gap. Secondly, I'd also say that for most creators who are at the top end, who could maybe move the needle, the ability to, and I said this at Edinburgh when I was there, to compensate and to pay them in a way that is meaningful is out of the realms for most TV channels and networks, especially now.
They can't compete to what the Sidemen will make from one video in 1 week for
Exactly.
a whole TV series, right?
And you're asking for, right, so if you were to be in their shoes, well, I'm going to make 10% of one video for 10 days of my time, in which I can't make 3 or 4 videos that will make 90% more than the 10% you're giving me, or whatever it might be. It will always be that level of disparity, purely because the numbers on YouTube and on your own platform are going to be so much more than anything that anyone can pay you. So yeah, it becomes a real tricky bargain where I think it has to be a lot more about, okay, well, if you guys have ideas that we can help you distribute and put out there to different audiences and to scale through our expertise, our networks, our institutions, if we can help you do that and we can become partners on shows and we can develop co-formats together, and you can be a producer on a format that you might have always wanted to make for Netflix or for a big streamer or whatever it might be, that's more interesting than saying, well, you're going to feature in this and we're going to give you a couple of grand a day and you're going to have to work your ass off for it, because ultimately they won't want to do that and they'll just say no. And I think a lot of creators, as the economy goes up and up and up for the creator industry, they're going to get richer and richer and richer and have less of an incentive as time goes on to jump into linear and into the spaces of TV, which are, from an economical perspective, struggling and have been struggling for a while. And if you look at most TV networks, there is less and less money to spend, not more.
Well, also the commissioners are getting older and older, and the money's getting less and less. And so all of these things are not adding up. It just doesn't make any sort of sense. And you can see that, as you say, the way that the trends are going. So it's more about partnership. It's more about ideas and partnership and distribution and that whole skill set and community knowledge, as well as content creation. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think it's about, the thing that can be more interesting is around IP. And if you have incredible distribution, that you can't have being a YouTuber who's only ever worked on YouTube, or even a team around a YouTuber who's never, been in that top level of the TV industry, for example, or in the content industry. If you have those connections and the ability to help distribute and to help create, formats that can travel across the world, like those things are immensely valuable. And that is a much better conversation and more interesting conversation than starring my show. Rather, let's create formats together, leverage each other's expertise to create big global formats that can take over and do amazing things. That gets me excited. I think that would get the boys, for example, excited, rather than, again, starring my show. Because I think that is... It's past that point. And I think that is the case for them. For other creators who are presenter creators who want to have a career in TV and that's their ambition, I think that's a different thing, because again, it's more about building your case studies, your CV, your portfolio, and building a career in it. So it's about, I think, not looking at creators as one, finding the creators who fit the industry. Firstly, that's your shortlist, rather than all creators with big numbers. Finding them and finding the ones who are very talented, and then bringing them into your content and leveraging them first and foremost because of their skill set, not because you want to reach a younger audience, rather because they're just brilliant at what they do.
We can speak for hours. I've got a whole list of questions I'm never going to get through because we're a little bit tight on time. But I'm going to ask you two more things. We started talking about the football match at the beginning of the show, which is essentially a charity football match that the Sidemen put on. And this is I think you said the fourth time when we had a chat before. It's the fourth show. Can you give us a sense of how successful that was? That happened this past weekend. So tell us, the scale of the success of this event.
Yeah, I mean, we were all blown away by it. We had the best roster and lineup of players that I think you could possibly get. Everyone from Mr. Beast and his crew to Speed, who's probably the biggest creator in the world, I'd say, at the moment in terms of hype and energy. You saw that on Saturday. To all the incredible YouTubers in the UK and creators in the UK, from Chunks and Philly to Harry Pinero to, Chris MD, Theo Baker, Calix, Freezy, and then obviously all the Sidemen boys, Jamie and so on. So an amazing lineup of players from around the world. It was a huge success. We had 2.6 million people concurrent as live viewers on the stream, which is bigger than the Champions League final was on YouTube, which is an amazing story and a great headline. And it probably makes it one of the biggest, if not the biggest in Europe, probably ever. If it was beating the Champions League final, I can't think of many other live streams that could. YouTube were blown away by it. We had, I think about 16 million views after about 13 hours. Probably, I'm sure it's upwards of 20 million now.
Yeah,
on catch up. Yeah. It ended on 12 million. So if you were to think of any other show on TV that would end with 12 million viewers, you'd be like, wow, that's biggest in the country, biggest of the year. I mean, Saturday Night Takeaway, when I was working with Anton Decken at YMU, was 10 million, and that was the biggest show of the year. So this was 12 million afterwards. So huge. And this was a 3-hour stream. Great retention. We had, I think, 600,000 people waiting to watch it before the stream even begun. And we raised over $1 million for charity. So we raised for 4 charities: Calm and Teenage Cancer Trust, Rays of Sunshine, which supports terminally ill children, and M7 Education, which was set up by Simon as a foundation. Over £1 million raised, 2.6 million concurrent viewers. I had a really good game of football. It was like 15 goals, 8-7. Sidemen FC was Simon winner at the end. It was brilliant.
It was at Charlton Athletics Ground, and there were
27,000.
27,000 people were there physically as well.
And we sold that out overnight. So it was as quick as the tickets could process. So it was, and there was 100 tickets a minute because Charlton's system wasn't really at the level we needed it to be in terms of managing all of the numbers. We crashed that site as well. It was a stressful day, but we got through it, and we realized actually, and you could see it, we had, I think, 150,000 unique people trying to get tickets at the time. And there was, I think, 2.5 tickets on average, just in the normal basket. So even with the drop off and everything, if we had 80,000 people trying to get tickets with the 2.5 per person average, you'd have sold out multiple Wembleys. So that's the bit for us where we go, wow, like we need to step it up next year, and we're definitely going to go bigger. Because that was the one thing that we should have done.
You think you can do Wembley? Do you think, is that going to be the ambition?
I think they definitely could. It's whether or not they want to in terms of the ground. I think, Wembley, there's obviously amazing stadiums. I'm a big Arsenal fan, so obviously somewhat biased. The Spurs Stadium's incredible. It'd be amazing to do it somewhere just big and to celebrate, especially given it's the 10-year anniversary. It has to be like the biggest ever. And I think we're all of us are geared up and ready. The boys especially are ready to do something amazing next year with it. So yeah, everyone can be more excited. Everyone's super happy, and most importantly, we raised like £1 million for charity, which is the best thing, because that's the whole point of it.
Fantastic. And finally, you're also going to be joining us for the TellyCast Digital Content Forum, sponsored by BBC Studios, in November. So thank you for agreeing to come on to that.
Yes, no, thank you for having me.
That panel. So it's going to be an amazing panel. I saw there was a comment online calling it the Glastonbury of digital when it comes to a sort of B2B event. So on that panel, we have Lad Bible, we have Joe Sugg, we've got Jungle Creations, Wall of Entertainment, and Your Good Self. So some amazing channels and creators and publishers and executives involved in that. So that's going to be a fascinating conversation. And now it's time for Story of the Week, where my guests get to choose the TV or content industry story that caught their eye in the past 7 days. Jordan, what's your story of the week?
Being on Sky Sports, and Sky Simon charity match, £1 million raised for charity, and 2.6 million concurrent, which got a lot of headlines. So that's probably the one for me. Has to be.
Yeah, of course. And now it's time to find out your hero of the week and who or what you're telling to get in the bin. Jordan, who's your hero of the week?
My hero of the week, I'll say, again, I'll keep it in the family. I'll say Simon for his hat trick and his 10 rating, which was pretty amazing on FOTMob. To get in the bin, oh no. The kids who tried to storm the ground.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're not good. And then lots of people who with tickets couldn't get in.
Well, these were kids trying to get in, and they were trying to get over the gates.
There were about 400 or 500 people outside who were trying to storm it, and they were just absolute melons. And it meant that people with tickets couldn't get in, and that they need to all get in the bin and go back to their parents because they were up way too late for people their age. So they can get in the bin.
Okay. Jordan, brilliant speaking to you. Thank you.
Mate, thank you so much.
I've learned a lot about Sidemen. I'm sure our audience has as well. And thanks again. I'll see you in November down at the BFI South Bank. We'll see you very soon. Thanks a lot.
Mate, thank you so much.
Well, that's it for this week's show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please share it on socials with friends and colleagues, or even your kids if they're Sidemen fans. Tickets for the TellyCast Digital Content Forum, sponsored by BBC Studios, are on sale now. And if you buy before midnight on Friday 30th of September, you can benefit from the super early bird ticket rate. For more info, go to telecast.com/events. TellyCast was edited by Ian Chambers and recorded in London. On next week's show, my guests are BBC Studios Director, Digital and Business Development, Helen Pendlebury, and Managing Director of Intertalent Group, Alex Siegel. Until then, stay safe